I'm sorry to be the one to say it, but the era of great conflicts seems to be back. From the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to the urban war in Gaza, to the red-hot tension in Upper Karabakh, or the threat of invasion of Taiwan, and let's not forget the endless skirmishes, coup d'etat, and battles that we find everywhere in Africa. VisualPolitik community. The world seems to be on fire. Yes, we could all use a collective relaxation session. But you know what they say, money is the nerve of war. This phrase, commonly attributed to the Roman philosopher and politician Cicero, explains current news stories like these.
U.S. aid to Israel and Ukraine. Here's what's in the $105 billion national security package Biden requested. Blinken in Ukraine. U.S. announces $1 billion in military, civilian aid. U.S. announces $345 million military aid package for Taiwan.
And of course, if there is one country that is banging the drums of war, it is clearly the United States. Because if guns were music, there is no doubt that the US would be the main DJ at this wild macro party. To give you an idea, in the last 4 years, Uncle Sam's military exports have accounted for 40% of all armaments traded worldwide. As you can see, the flow of US armaments to the rest of the world is twice as large as that of Russia, and multiplies the market share of China by up to 8 times. It is clear that if there is one thing the Americans know how to do, it is to manufacture weapons. In that respect, the US is unbeatable. Of course, in addition to selling weapons, the US is also sustaining or supporting various war efforts. Let's just say that at this time, the US superpower is fighting wars without putting a single man on the battlefield. Today, the US is financially and operationally up to its neck in at least 3 hot zones. Firstly, I don't need to tell you, in Ukraine. Secondly, in the Taiwan Strait. And thirdly, in Israel. The result is that the Oval Office, or rather the Oval Pressure Cooker, is now under enormous geopolitical stress. Because each of these 3 hotspots needs, in its own way, and I say this because they themselves ask for it, economic and military assistance from Uncle Sam. And that's why we here on VisualPolitik came up with a few questions. How is the US sustaining these 3 war fronts at the same time? Will the US giant be able to finance these campaigns? What exactly are they costing? Well, we're going to see all of this and more as the video unfolds. But before we continue, do you use a smartwatch? Are you tired of getting notifications constantly? Of having to charge it day after day? Or that practically everyone has the same watch? Today's sponsor brings us an air of individuality as well as connection with nature. Holtzkern specializes in producing completely unique accessories, something that stands out in this hyper-globalized and standardized world. But how can that be possible? The explanation lies in the use of natural materials. Resources like wood, stone, or mother of pearl have the great advantage of being naturally unique. No piece of wood is exactly like another, depending on where a tree grew up and the climate it was exposed to. Its wood differs not only in coloration, but also in grain and structure. The same is true for other raw materials, like marble, semi-precious stones, slate, or mother of pearl. Each piece has its own individual look. So when you wear a Holtzkern watch like this, you can be sure that it is a 100% unique piece, that there is no other watch in the world that looks exactly the same, just like your fingerprint or the color of your eyes. With Holtzkern, you run 0 risk. You have a 100% money-back guarantee, 24 months warranty, an extended refund period until 31st of January 2024, and free express shipping worldwide. Click the link in the description and enjoy Holtzkern's exclusive Black Week deal. Buy one and get the second at 50% off. Don't miss out on the biggest discount special of the year at Holtzkern, available until the 27th. And now, fire up your engines and let's start. Whenever tension sparks in the world, it is rare not to find the United States in the middle of it. It is what many call the illusion of believing that it is the world's policeman, a kind of sheriff in the Wild West. Be that as it may, the point is that today's US military is the only one capable of reasonably rapid and large deployments of troops and equipment to virtually any remote corner of the globe. And not surprisingly, this logistical capacity gives them inordinate influence. On the one hand, it allows them to be able to intervene directly in any conflict. And on the other hand, it allows them to support any foreign government at any time. Without going any further, the war in Ukraine has been a good example. Come to think of it, Uncle Sam managed to quickly deliver a huge amount of weapons, ammunition, and supplies of all kinds to the Ukrainian army in the midst of the Russian offensive. Of course, all this capacity has not been created overnight. Rather, it has been a goal since the 1940s, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt pushed the idea that the US had to become the arsenal of democracy, an idea that, to a greater or lesser extent, and perhaps with the sole exception of Donald Trump, has been maintained by all US presidents to date.
And until the world can develop a reliable system of international security, the free people have no choice but to keep their arms near.
We furnish most of the money, most of the arms, most of the men to help other nations defend their freedom.
The strength of our national defense must be restored so that we can pursue prosperity and peace and freedom while maintaining our commitment to the truly needy.
I'm going to ask the United States Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense.
Generally speaking, for both Democrats and Republicans, this has always been a priority. In a way, we could say that from Biden to Roosevelt. And look how much has changed between them. The formula for American global influence has not changed much. A little diplomacy, a lot of guns, and a pinch of, I can be at your house before a pizza delivery guy. Seriously. Naturally, all this has resulted in multi-billion-dollar military spending and also in the financing of a lot of conflicts around the world. Well, the fact is that in order to carry out this last mission, the US government has rules that must be followed when delivering military supplies to another country. We're primarily talking about the Foreign Assistance Act. This law allows the US government to provide financial and material assistance, including military assistance, to foreign countries in order to promote, not surprisingly, its own interests. Now, the question is, how is this assistance carried out? Well, there are basically three ways. First, through what is known as foreign military sales. Through this procedure, the United States authorizes the sale of sensitive equipment to allied countries. In other words, we're talking about commercial transactions, factory orders, but which are brokered by the Department of Defense. Secondly, we have what is known as foreign military financing. In this case, the United States, in accordance with State Department criteria, directly finances or subsidizes the purchase of new US military equipment by third countries. And third is the Presidential Drawdown Authority. This allows for the direct transfer of military equipment from the US stock itself.
If the president determines and informs the Congress of that A, an unforeseen emergency exists requiring immediate military assistance to a foreign country, and B, the emergency requirement cannot be met under the authority of the Export Control Act of or any other law except this section, he may order the withdrawal of defense articles from the stockpile of the Department of Defense in an aggregate value not to exceed $100 million in any fiscal year.
You have probably already noticed that the figure is a bit short. This is because the law is old, so since 1960, about 20 amendments have been passed to change the transfer caps. In 2022, this figure was $11 billion. The thing is that the distinction between foreign military sales, foreign military financing, and direct transfer is not just a technicality, but as we're about to see, it is something that has generated an increasingly heated debate in Washington. Increasingly numerous military conflicts are forcing Washington to reshuffle its bets. So the question is, what demands do Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan place on US military assistance today? Is the White House overwhelmed by the ongoing military tensions? Well, VisualPolitik viewers, for this, we will have to go point by point, because the truth is that each dossier that comes into the hands of Biden and his advisors brings with it its own set of headaches. So let's start with the Far East. Listen up.
Taiwan, the price of deterrence.
The seas of China have been the State Department's #1 priority for military deterrence over the past decade. Ironically, it is the only space where, at least right now, US interests are not yet in the midst of active conflict. In this case, the distribution and allocation of military equipment to Taiwan is very different from cooperation with Ukraine and Israel. For starters, because the island is not itself an independent country, or at least it is not in Beijing's eyes. For the Xi Jinping regime, the US-Taiwan relationship is something like the relationship between a sovereign country and a Chinese province. This obliges the Americans to carry out a lot of legal engineering when it comes to allocating funds and military equipment. Secondly, the Taiwan Strait theater of operations is unique, since in this case we are talking about an island warfare situation, where the Navy and Air Force are absolutely key, in contrast, for example, to the usefulness of ground infantry in the Israeli and Ukrainian wars. So the point is that since 1979, the US has been obligated to make, and this is a literal quote, available to Taiwan defense articles and defense services in such quantity as may be necessary to enable Taiwan to maintain sufficient self-defense capabilities. This is expressly stated in the Taiwan Relations Act signed into law by then-President Jimmy Carter. Since then, military cooperation with Taiwan has been guided by foreign military sales. In other words, Taiwan is a relatively wealthy country that could pay for its arms purchases. What it needs, above all, is access to advanced equipment.
For decades, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan have been the most visible U.S. contribution to Taiwan's defense capabilities. In FY 2022-2022 combined, Taiwan was the largest purchaser of U.S. foreign military sales, FMS. It was the fourth largest purchaser of FMS from FY 1950 to FY 2022 combined.
However, in recent years, this form of cooperation with Taiwan has begun to generate a great deal of doubts about its effectiveness, mainly for two reasons. First of all, there is a timing problem. Orders take years and years to be delivered.
It was recently revealed that $19 billion worth of potential sales were in the pipeline, with some items dating back to 2016. This long timeline is incompatible with an immediate sense of threat.
Arming Taiwan in this way means that it can take years and years before the equipment is delivered and becomes operational. For example, as of 2019, the US is managing the purchase of more than 60 F-16 aircraft destined for Taiwan's air forces. The point is that in September 2023, aircraft manufacturer Lockheed Martin said it was redoubling its efforts to produce, by the end of 2025, about 4 F-16 aircraft per month. And of course, if we take into account that this company also has to deal with purchases from other countries, such as Slovakia and Bahrain, the flow of fighters to Taiwan is slower than an arthritic turtle. And that is not all. A potential war in the Taiwan Strait would require an unprecedented logistical deployment. The effort would have to focus on preventing the island from being blockaded by the Chinese Navy, ensuring a constant supply line with Western allies at all times, while preventing or quashing any enemy landing attempt. The problem, in order to meet these objectives, requires capabilities that do not match well with the equipment being purchased by the Taiwanese military. It's something we've already talked about here on VisualPolitik.
Taiwan needs a new defense strategy to deal with China. American experts criticize Taiwan for spending too much on expensive items. Instead of buying and building big ships, planes, and tanks that can be easily disabled by Chinese missiles, they say Taiwan should build up ammunition reserves and buy cheaper, more mobile weapons. The strawman defense is torching Taiwan's military. Taiwan should assess its existing force and all future investments. A large share of their security budget is devoted to capabilities that will not survive the first few minutes of a war, or that offer little capability to blunt an invasion.
Now, following the Ukraine experience, Washington has begun to take the defense of Taiwan much more seriously, lest the lack of deterrence due to unpreparedness ends up provoking an invasion that forces the United States to go to war. Precisely for this reason, in September 2023, Biden notified Congress that he would use his presidential authority to partially change the model of military assistance to the island. In this way, the Biden administration will make direct deliveries of military equipment from the US Armed Forces' own stocks. This, in addition to speeding up some critical deliveries, will give the Americans enormous power to decide what is sent into the strait and thereby influence Taiwanese strategy. The question is, to what extent has the war experience in Ukraine had anything to do with it? Well, pay attention, because the link with Kyiv may have been the tipping point in pushing Taiwan to number one in the list of priorities.
Ukraine, when the chips are down.
I think it is no secret that since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the United States has sent a huge amount of weapons to Europe. We're talking about the largest assistance plan in the old continent since the Marshall Plan. Since the outbreak of the conflict in February last year, the US has allocated more than $75 billion in assistance to the Ukrainian government. Naturally, a very large chunk of all this aid has been used to send a gigantic amount of arms and ammunition. However, US solidarity may not be unlimited. Many Republicans of the Trumpist wing think that aid to Kyiv has been excessive.
Ukraine aid in doubt as Johnson moves to drop it from Israel assistance bill. We're not going to abandon them, Mr. Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives, added of the Ukrainians. But we have a responsibility, a stewardship responsibility over the precious treasure of the American people, and we have to make sure that the White House is providing the people with some accountability for the dollars.
Let's see. The Biden administration wants Congress to approve $61 billion more for Ukraine. $61 billion is a lot of money, but it's really not that large an amount, at least for the giant US economy. In some ways, the Ukrainian war has been relatively cheap, especially if we take into account the results that this aid is producing. And remember, it's not only us saying this, but the Republican leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, himself. Check it out.
If you look at the Ukraine assistance, let's talk about where the money's really going. A significant portion of it's being spent in the United States in 38 different states, replacing the weapons that we sent to Ukraine with more modern weapons. So we're rebuilding our industrial base. I have a hard time finding anything wrong with that.
And in terms of political pragmatism, he is right. It is tough to say, but if we talk about realpolitik, this war is turning out to be very cheap for the United States. In terms of GDP, it has only meant an expenditure of 0.18% in military equipment and 0.3% in total. But then why do so many Republicans seem to have so many problems? Well, let's see. Apparently, the complaints are not directly linked to the military aid itself, but to the conditions under which it is sent. So you see, from day one, Biden has used presidential authority and the foreign military financing program to address arms deliveries to Ukraine, which is quite logical, since either weapons were being shipped at full speed or Russia would have ended up getting away with the invasion. The problem is that this has meant that transparency is not so great. There is little information on freight, deliveries, and suppliers. In a sense, aid has been delivered under a kind of grey umbrella that Republicans have harshly criticized. Of course, think about it for a moment. Considering the war that was being waged, perhaps it would not have made much sense for the United States to announce the deliveries made publicly and in detail. Then, another criticism is that the transfers are reducing the US military's own stockpile of weapons by an amount that, given the current production levels of the US military industry, may take quite some time to replenish. Be that as it may, the fact is that this lack of transparency, and above all, the growing political tension, along with the fatigue of a war that is already dragging on too long, has made Americans less and less supportive, particularly Republicans and independents, of continued cooperation with Ukraine. Take a look. Of course, this in itself is yet another headache for the Biden administration on the eve of a new election year. But given the case of Ukraine, where is the US role in the Gaza war heading? And is this conflict a kind of poisoned apple for the Biden administration? Listen up.
Israel, the last straw.
As they say, it never rains, but it pours. If the dossiers and meetings in the Pentagon could not cope with the demands of Taipei and Kyiv, the Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October was the final straw. Secretary of State Antony Blinken now has to deal not only with new cooperation with Taiwan and the growing tension surrounding a hypothetical Chinese invasion, but also with the Republican threat to block funding to Ukraine, and what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called Israel's second war of independence. Nevertheless, at least in this case, the path is better laid out. The United States and Israel are very close allies, and since November 1983, a joint political military group has been in operation, which annually designs and agrees on assistance programs between the two countries. All this is usually done through agreements approved by Congress, or through more modest instances in administrative terms, as is the case with the transfer of surplus weapons. In fact, Israel is the country that has received the most military surplus from the US in the last decade, far, far above the capabilities transferred under this system to Taiwan or Ukraine. On top of that, according to official information as of October 2023, the United States had almost 600 contracts with Israel related to F-35 combat aircraft, CH-53K heavy lift helicopters, KC-46A refueling tankers, and precision-guided munitions. Many of these contracts are paid for by the United States. In fact, to give you an idea, it is estimated that since 1948, the United States has provided Israel with more than $130 billion in bilateral aid. About $260 billion in today's dollars if inflation is taken into account. But of course, that is not all. As we have already told you here on VisualPolitik, the risk of a larger scale conflict developing, with Hezbollah, Syria, or even Iran involved, has made the Biden administration redouble its efforts, sending a lot of military troops and ships directly to the area and also increasing military assistance to Israel. We are talking about an additional aid package of at least $14 billion. So you see, these are the three hottest or coldest conflicts in which Washington is up to its neck. It has been a long time since the US military has been under so much pressure in terms of stocks and arsenals of ammunition and weapons. The question is, to what extent do you think the US should support Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel? What would be your order of priority? Leave us your thoughts in the comments and let's start a debate. And now, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. All the best, see you next time.